When my daughter-in-law told me I should find a place of my own, I didn't argue. I just smiled, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 thoughts. You see, I'd already lost too much in life to waste energy on anger. My wife, Margaret, passed away 3 years ago, and my only son, Ethan, was all I had left. When he married Linda, I honestly thought I'd gained another daughter. She seemed warm at first, polite, attentive, even caring. But some people are kind only when they need to be. After Margaret's passing, my house started feeling emptier by the day. Ethan insisted I move in with them for a while. "Dad," he said, "you shouldn't be alone. We have a guest room. Stay as long as you want." I agreed, not because I needed help, but because I thought it might bring us closer again. I missed hearing my son's laughter in the evenings, the sound of a family around a dinner table. At first, it was fine. I helped around the house, fixed the squeaky fence, painted the porch, even cooked dinner a few times a week. Linda would smile politely and say, "Thank you, Mr. Harris." She never called me Dad. That word was reserved only for her father, and I never forced it. But slowly, the smiles faded. I started to notice the sighs, the way she'd roll her eyes when I offered advice, the quiet tension whenever Ethan wasn't home. It was subtle at first. A few misplaced words, a few cold glances. Then, one morning, I overheard her talking on the phone. She didn't know I was in the kitchen. "I can't keep living like this," she said, her voice sharp. "He's always here. It's like I married both of them." My heart sank. She wasn't wrong that I was around a lot, but it was my son who'd insisted. I'd been careful not to overstep. But that's the thing about people who want you gone. They'll find a reason no matter how small. Later that evening, she asked me to join her and Ethan in the living room. She had that practice tone, polite but firm. "Mr. Harris," she began, "we've been thinking, maybe it's time you had your own space again. You know, some independence." Ethan looked torn. He glanced at me, then at her. "Dad, maybe we can find you a nice apartment nearby," he said gently. "It's just, the house is getting crowded." Crowded? The place had 4 bedrooms. I didn't respond immediately. I looked at Linda, and she avoided my eyes. I could have argued. I could have reminded Ethan that it was his mother's dying wish that we stay close. But something inside me told me not to fight. Instead, I nodded. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's time I found a place of my own." Linda looked surprised, almost disappointed that I didn't argue. People like her expect confrontation, they feed on it. When you stay calm, it unsettles them. That night, I packed my bags quietly. Ethan hugged me before I left. "Dad, I hope you're not upset," he said softly. I smiled. "No, son. I'm proud of you. You're building your life. I'll be fine." And I meant it, mostly. But as I drove away, the ache in my chest grew heavier. Not because of being pushed out, but because I realized something. Linda didn't just want space. She wanted control. And that's when an idea, small at first, quiet as a whisper, started forming in my mind. I wasn't going to fight her with anger. No, that's too easy. Anger fades. But quiet strategy, that stays. I found a small rental 2 streets away. From there, I could still see the outline of their home if I walked to the corner. I started rebuilding my life, slow, patient steps. Every morning, I took walks through the neighborhood. I greeted everyone with a smile. I fixed things for neighbors, helped mow lawns, even volunteered at the local community center. Word spread fast that Mr. Harris was a good man, reliable, kind, the sort of neighbor everyone trusted. And then, one morning, while having coffee at the local cafe, I saw a small for sale sign appear on a lawn, directly across from Ethan and Linda's house. I didn't rush. I simply watched. Over the next few days, a few people came to see the property, but no one made an offer. Something about it, maybe the worn-out paint or the aging porch, kept buyers away. But to me, it wasn't just a house. It was opportunity wrapped in silence. 3 weeks later, I made an offer. A fair one, nothing dramatic. The seller accepted. Linda didn't know yet. Ethan didn't either. But soon they would see me again, not as a burden, but as a neighbor. And that, I thought as I signed the papers, would be the beginning of something she'd never forget. Not revenge. Not spite. Just perspective. When I moved into the rental 2 streets away, the silence felt heavier than I'd imagined. The place was small, just a single-story home with creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and a porch that needed sanding. But it was mine, and after years of sharing space, I welcomed the quiet. I remember standing in that empty living room on the first night, holding a picture frame of Margaret and me from our 30th anniversary. Her smile in that photograph had the kind of warmth that could light up a room. I placed it on the mantel and whispered, "Well, love, it's just me again." Grief is strange. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It sneaks up on you in the middle of a quiet evening or during a morning coffee. Sometimes it comes disguised as loneliness, other times as a soft ache behind your ribs. Margaret and I built everything together. We weren't wealthy, but we lived honestly. I worked in construction management for 30 years, and she was a teacher at the local elementary school. We raised Ethan to believe that kindness was strength, not weakness. But somewhere along the way, he grew up into a world that rewarded speed and ambition more than patience and gratitude. Linda came from that world. She worked in corporate marketing, sharp mind, quicker tongue. I never doubted her intelligence, but I often wondered if she valued people the same way Margaret did. Still, I tried. I made room for her ideas. I respected her boundaries. I even stepped back when she wanted to decorate the house her way. But sometimes, when someone's heart is already close to you, no act of kindness can pry it open. My days in the new house slowly found rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, the soft rustle of leaves, and the sound of distant cars heading toward the highway. I'd watch the sun climb the sky and think about how life, even when it seems to push you away, always offers you another beginning. I started walking to the nearby park. There I met a few regulars, old-timers like me who'd gather near the benches to chat about the weather, politics, or just life. One of them, an ex-firefighter named George, quickly became a friend. He had a blunt sense of humor and a dog named Daisy who loved everyone except mailmen. "New in town?" he asked one morning. "Sort of," I said, sipping my coffee. "Used to live just a few blocks away." He nodded. "Ah, family nearby then?" "Yeah," I said softly. "My son lives close." He didn't pry, and I appreciated that. The more time I spent there, the lighter my heart felt. I realized I didn't miss living under Linda's rules. What I missed was Ethan, my son, the boy who used to help me fix the fence and laugh about the smallest things. But when I'd call, he was often busy. "Sorry, Dad," he'd say. "Work's been crazy. Linda's got deadlines. We'll drop by soon." They didn't. I didn't blame him entirely. I could hear Linda's influence even through the phone, the polite tone, the rushed goodbyes. She distanced him from me without him even noticing. But I was patient. I'd learned long ago that time reveals everything, including people's true intentions. A few weeks later, I officially became the owner of the house across the street from theirs. The process went smoothly, almost too smoothly. The seller, an older widow named Mrs. Campbell, was moving to Florida to be near her daughter. She was kind, reminded me a bit of Margaret. "You'll love it here," she said as she handed me the keys. "It's a peaceful neighborhood. The folks across the street are young, just starting a family, I think." I smiled faintly. "Yes, I know." When I moved my things in, I did it quietly. I didn't announce it, didn't wave any flags. I simply carried boxes one at a time, set up my furniture, and settled into my new life across the street from my son and his wife, the very people who thought they'd seen the last of me. The first morning, I saw Linda standing on their porch watering her plants. When she looked up and noticed me across the street, Her expression froze. For a moment, she just stared, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Then, without a word, she turned and went inside. I chuckled to myself. Not out of malice, but because life, sometimes, writes better stories than we ever could. Over the following weeks, I became part of the neighborhood in ways she never expected. I helped fix the mailbox for the woman next door. I trimmed hedges for an elderly couple down the block. When the community association needed volunteers for the annual street fair, I was the first to sign up. Linda watched from across the street. At first, she pretended not to notice. But soon, I could feel her eyes on me when I was outside painting the fence or chatting with neighbors. People would wave at me, bring pies, or ask for advice. Slowly, I became Mr. Harris, the nice man across the street. And Ethan, he noticed too. One Saturday afternoon, he dropped by. "Dad, I didn't realize you bought this place," he said, looking genuinely surprised. I smiled. Seemed like a good opportunity. Close to you, quiet area, nice neighbors. He laughed nervously. "Linda didn't mention you were moving here." "I figured she wouldn't," I said simply. "Didn't want to be a bother." He hesitated, then hugged me. "You're never a bother, Dad." But even he sounded unsure, as if part of him was trying to convince himself it was true. I didn't push to visit their home. I let them come when they wanted. And slowly, I began to notice subtle cracks in their perfect facade. Ethan looked tired more often. Linda's smiles were tighter, forced. One evening, as I sat on my porch, I heard raised voices from across the street. Not shouting, but tense enough to carry through the still night. "I told you," Linda said, her tone sharp, "it's awkward having him there." Ethan sighed. "He's just living his life, Linda. He's not bothering anyone." "It's weird, Ethan. People will think." "Think what?" he interrupted. "That my father lives nearby. So what?" I sipped my tea and looked at the stars. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was something quieter. Vindication, maybe. The kind that doesn't celebrate someone's discomfort, but rather confirms that truth always finds its way to the surface. Weeks turned into months, and my home became a small haven of peace. I built a small garden in the backyard, planted roses Margaret used to love, and restored an old wooden bench I found at a garage sale. The days felt calm, filled with purpose again. Sometimes, the neighborhood kids would wave as they passed by, shouting, "Hi, Mr. Harris." And I'd wave back, smiling. Across the street, Linda would often stand at her window, arms crossed, watching. Maybe she wondered why people seemed drawn to me, why kindness cost me nothing but earned me everything. I never said a word to her about the past. I didn't need to. Life was already beginning to speak for me. That winter, a storm hit the town. The winds were fierce, and power went out across several blocks. I had a backup generator. Years of working in construction taught me the importance of preparedness. Around 10 p.m., there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, soaked from the rain. Linda was behind him, shivering, holding their toddler wrapped in a blanket. "Dad," Ethan said, "the power's out. Can we stay here for a while?" I looked at them, then stepped aside. "Of course," I said simply. "Come in." As they entered, I noticed Linda's eyes scanning the room, the clean floor, the warm light, the comfort. There was no bitterness on my face, only calm. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's nice here." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." That night, as they sat by the fire, sipping the tea I made, I saw something shift in Ethan's eyes. He wasn't just looking at his father, he was seeing me for who I'd always been. And Linda, sitting quietly beside him, seemed to realize something too, though she said nothing. But I knew. Sometimes, silence teaches the loudest lessons. After that winter storm night, things changed, though not in ways most people would notice. From the outside, life looked perfectly normal again. Ethan and Linda went back to their home across the street, and I continued living mine as usual. But silence carries weight. It lingers after the words fade, reminding people of what they said, what they implied, and what they chose to ignore. Linda had seen my life now, the calmness, the order, the quiet dignity that came from peace. And something about that unsettled her. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But the subtle tension returned, only this time, it wasn't hidden. One morning, I was in the front yard trimming the hedge when Linda walked by with her toddler, Mason, in the stroller. She nodded politely at first, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Morning," I said, friendly as ever. "Morning," she replied, pushing the stroller a little faster. A few steps later, she stopped and turned back. "By the way," she said, trying to sound casual, "some of the neighbors were asking if we're related." I didn't know what to say. I smiled. "You can tell them I'm your husband's father. Nothing to hide there." Her lips tightened. "Right. It's just, people like to talk. And it's unusual, you know, for in-laws to live across the street." "Unusual," I said calmly, "but not impossible. Especially when family matters." She nodded curtly and walked away without another word. I watched her go, realizing she wasn't just uncomfortable with my presence, she was threatened by it. Not because of what I did, but because I existed as a mirror she didn't like seeing. Over the next few weeks, I noticed little things. When neighbors invited me to gatherings, Linda would conveniently skip attending. At the community center where I volunteered every weekend, she started showing up too, claiming she wanted to get involved. But her presence wasn't for service. It was for attention. She'd wear her brightest smile, shake hands, and talk about family values, as though her image mattered more than her actions. One afternoon, during a local fundraiser, I saw her chatting with the event coordinator. She noticed me from across the hall and walked over, glass of lemonade in hand. "Mr. Harris," she said sweetly, "I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled. "I'm here every week, actually." "Oh, right," she replied. "Helping with the elderly programs, isn't it?" "Yes," I said softly. "Age teaches you patience. And perspective." Her smile faltered. "Of course." Then, before walking away, she added with a rehearsed laugh, "Well, it's nice you found something to keep yourself busy." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her insecurity was doing all the talking. At home, things were shifting too. Ethan began visiting more often, sometimes to drop off groceries, other times just to chat. He'd help me fix the fence or mow the lawn, and we'd talk about his work, his kid, and life. One Saturday, as we were cleaning the garage together, he sighed. "Dad," he said, "I feel like things have been tense lately." I kept sweeping the floor. "Between who?" "Between you and Linda," he said quietly. "She says you've been making her uncomfortable." I stopped, leaning on the broom. "How so?" He hesitated. "She says you're always watching. That you show up everywhere she goes." I chuckled softly. "Ethan's son. I've lived my life long enough to know when not to chase shadows. I go where I've always gone. Maybe it's her who keeps crossing paths." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know, Dad. I told her you wouldn't do anything like that. But she's been stressed." "Marriage can do that," I said gently. "Especially when people start hiding what's wrong instead of fixing it." He looked at me puzzled, then slowly nodded. "Yeah, maybe." As he left that day, I realized something painful. My son was caught in the quiet war between peace and pride. He loved us both, but didn't know how to choose truth without hurting someone. A few weeks later, I was out walking Daisy with George when Linda pulled up beside us in her car. She rolled down the window, her expression cold. "Mr. Harris," she called. "Could I talk to you for a second?" George glanced at me. "You good?" "I'm fine," I said. Linda stepped out, closing the door a bit harder than needed. "Listen," she began, voice tight. I don't appreciate you talking to Ethan about our marriage. I blinked. I haven't spoken about your marriage. I spoke about life. Her eyes narrowed. You think you're being clever, don't you? Moving across the street, pretending to be this wise old man everyone loves. Pretending. I said quietly. No, Linda. I don't pretend. That's your territory. Her jaw dropped slightly. Before she could respond, I continued calmly, You don't have to like me, Linda. But you don't have to fear me either. I don't take what isn't mine. I just let time do what time does best, reveal the truth. For a moment, she looked as though she might explode. But instead, she turned on her heel and walked back to her car. As she drove off, George chuckled softly. She's got fire, I'll give her that. I nodded. Fire burns out eventually. Water lasts longer. From then on, things began unraveling faster than even I expected. Linda's facade started to crack publicly. She became snappish at community meetings, overreacted to small things, and once even argued with a neighbor over a parking spot. People began noticing. Meanwhile, I stayed the same, polite, helpful, steady. I didn't need to defend myself. Life was doing it for me. One afternoon, Mrs. Campbell, the previous owner of my house, called me from Florida. Henry, she said, I heard from a friend back there that your daughter-in-law's been talking. Talking? I repeated. Yes. Saying things like you're manipulative, that you moved there to make her look bad. I smiled softly. Well, Mrs. Campbell, gossip only works if you react to it. I've learned to stay silent. It makes the truth louder. She laughed gently. You always had a way with words. But her call confirmed something for me. Linda wasn't just uncomfortable. She was desperate to control the narrative. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was Ethan's birthday. Linda organized a dinner at their house, inviting a few friends and neighbors. I was included too, probably out of obligation, not desire. When I arrived, Linda greeted me with a stiff smile. Mr. Harris, she said, so glad you could come. Wouldn't miss it, I replied warmly. The evening started pleasantly enough. People laughed, shared stories, and complimented the food. But halfway through dinner, one of Ethan's co-workers, a kind woman named Rachel, smiled at me and said, Ethan talks about you all the time, Mr. Harris. Says you've become the heart of the neighborhood. I smiled modestly. That's kind of him. I just try to do my part. Linda's smile froze. Well, she said loudly, Dad certainly likes to keep busy. He's made himself quite visible lately. The table went quiet. Ethan frowned. Linda. She continued, her tone sweet but sharp. I mean, some people just don't know how to give newlyweds space, right? A murmur of discomfort spread around the table. I set my fork down gently. Linda, I said softly, space is a luxury you give when there's love. Not when there's distance. Her face reddened. Excuse me. I mean, I continued calmly, you can build walls around your life, but sooner or later, even walls start to feel like prisons. The silence was deafening. Ethan's co-worker coughed awkwardly. The guests quickly changed the subject, and dinner stumbled on. But I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of embarrassment, the sting of exposure. That night, after everyone left, Ethan walked me to the door. Dad, he said quietly, I'm sorry about what she said. I put a hand on his shoulder. Don't be. Everyone reveals themselves eventually. Tonight wasn't about me, son. It was about truth finding light. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with conflict. Sometimes I think you understand her better than I do. I don't understand her, I said. I just see her. After that night, Linda grew distant, not just from me, but from everyone. Her attempts to control the narrative backfired. Neighbors avoided her, sensing the bitterness behind her smiles. Ethan, meanwhile, began spending more time at my house. He'd bring Mason over to play in the yard, help me with small projects, or just sit quietly after work. One evening, as we were repainting the porch, he said, "Dad, do you ever regret moving across the street?" I looked at him. No. Because sometimes, being near is the only way to help someone see what's far. He nodded thoughtfully, not fully grasping what I meant. But one day, he would. Linda's breaking point came unexpectedly. A neighbor's kid accidentally threw a baseball through her front window. Instead of calmly handling it, she stormed out, yelling at the boy and his mother in front of half the street. I was across the road fixing my mailbox. Everyone saw me watching, not judging, just observing quietly. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. Linda stood there, eyes red. "You must be happy," she said bitterly. "Everyone's talking about me now. The crazy woman across the street." I shook my head. "No, Linda. I'm not happy. You've made yourself unhappy enough." Her lip trembled. "You wanted this, didn't you? To humiliate me." I sighed softly. "No. I wanted you to understand something. Kindness isn't weakness. And respect doesn't need power to exist." She swallowed hard, unable to respond. Then, quietly, I added, "I never wanted revenge, Linda. I wanted peace. The difference is, peace doesn't need anyone to lose." She turned and walked away without another word. That night, I sat on my porch watching the lights in their house. Through the window, I saw Ethan talking to her, his tone calm, hers defensive. I didn't know what they were saying, but I didn't need to. Some lessons only come when the noise stops and the silence finally speaks. And in that moment, I realized, revenge isn't always about making someone suffer. Sometimes, it's simply about letting them see what they've become. I still remember the day everything changed. It wasn't some dramatic explosion of words or an emotional confrontation. No, it was quieter than that. Like a door closing softly but forever. It was a Wednesday morning. Michael had already gone to work, and Linda was getting ready for her weekly brunch with her friends. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my cup of tea, quietly reading the newspaper. I had learned to make myself small in that house, to take up as little space as possible. Linda came downstairs, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering to someone. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I did. "Yes, the lawyer said we can finalize it once the transfer is complete." "No, he doesn't know yet. He thinks we're keeping him here out of kindness." My chest tightened. I didn't fully understand what she meant at first. But I knew enough to feel something wasn't right. My instincts, those quiet little alarms that only years of experience can give, started ringing. Later that evening, when Michael came home, Linda smiled sweetly and told me she was planning to renovate the house. "Dad," she said, placing her hand on my shoulder, "we've been thinking. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in an assisted living community for a while. Somewhere quiet, peaceful. With people your age." I looked up from my seat and met her eyes. There it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. She wanted me gone. Michael avoided my gaze. He didn't say a word. That silence hurt more than her words ever could. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and said, "Of course. If that's what you both think is best." But inside, something shifted. I wasn't angry, not anymore. Anger burns too hot, and I had spent a lifetime learning that it leaves only ashes behind. What I felt instead was a deep, still determination. The kind that comes when you realize someone has mistaken your kindness for weakness. That night, I sat alone in my room, my soon-to-be former room, thinking about everything that had led to this point. I thought of Margaret, my late wife, and how she used to tell me, "David, when life tries to push you out, find a way to step back in, quietly." She was right. Always was. So, I decided I wouldn't fight them. I wouldn't beg to stay. But I would make sure they learned something, not through pain, but through realization. Revenge, after all, doesn't always have to scream. Sometimes, it whispers. The next morning, I began my quiet plan. When Linda went out for errands, I called an old friend, Frank. He and I had been in the same real estate business years ago. He was one of the few people I still trusted completely. "Frank," I said, "do you still handle property listings around Maple Avenue?"
"Sure do," he replied.
"Looking to buy or sell?"
"Buy," I said calmly.
But quietly.
He chuckled.
"Still got that quiet style, huh, David? What are you thinking?" "There's a house across the street from my son's. The one with the blue shutters."
"I want it."
There was a brief silence before Frank spoke again. "That one just went on the market last week. Price is fair, but it might go fast."
"You sure?"
"More sure than I've been about anything in a while." Over the next week, while Linda believed I was looking at retirement communities, I was finalizing the paperwork. Frank handled everything discreetly. I used savings and part of my pension, money I had put away years ago for emergencies. This certainly felt like one. Within days, the sale was confirmed. The house across the street was mine. When the agent handed me the keys, I stood in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through the curtains, and smiled for the first time in months. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my peace. 2 weeks later, I packed my belongings. Linda helped, or rather supervised, as the movers loaded boxes into the truck. "You'll love the place we found for you," she said cheerfully. "They have group activities and everything." I just nodded, hiding my quiet amusement. Michael hugged me before I left. "Dad, don't be mad at Linda. She just wants the best for everyone." "I know," I said, smiling faintly.
"Take care of each other."
As the truck drove away, I looked back through the window. Linda stood at the porch, satisfied. She probably thought she had finally gotten rid of me. She had no idea I was just crossing the street. The next morning, she saw me. I was standing on the front lawn of my new house, waving politely as she stepped outside to collect the mail. Her face froze. "Good morning, Linda," I called cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She stammered something, forcing a smile. "You moved here?"
"Just across the street," I replied.
Didn't want to be too far from family. It was the first time I had seen her speechless. From that day on, everything changed, not just for her but for me too. I kept my life simple. I tended the garden, took long walks, invited neighbors over for tea. Slowly, people in the community began to notice me. I became friends with the retired couple next door and even started volunteering at the local library. Meanwhile, Linda's perfect little world started to show cracks. Without realizing it, she had alienated most of the neighborhood. Her constant gossip, her need to control everything, it had made her unpopular. And now, people found comfort talking to me instead. Michael started visiting, first out of guilt, then out of habit. We'd sit on my porch, sharing quiet conversations over coffee. He looked more relaxed there than he ever did in his own home. One evening, Michael said softly, "Dad, I didn't realize how much I missed this. Just talking. Linda, she's been different lately. Stressed, I guess." I smiled knowingly. Sometimes, son, when people chase control, they end up losing peace. He nodded, not fully understanding yet.
But he would soon.
A few weeks later, Linda came over herself. I saw her from the window, hesitating before knocking. "David," she said, forcing a smile. "I just wanted to make sure you're settling in fine." "I'm doing very well, thank you," I replied kindly. "Would you like to come in?" She hesitated but nodded. Inside, she looked around at the neat, warm space. The smell of apple pie filled the air, a recipe from Margaret's old cookbook. "You seem comfortable," she said, her tone a mix of surprise and discomfort.
"I am," I said.
"I've always believed peace doesn't depend on where you live, but how you live." There was silence between us, heavy, but not hostile. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. She realized then that she hadn't pushed an old man into loneliness, she had simply freed him from her shadow. And that realization was my quiet victory. I didn't need to shame her or speak of what she'd done. Watching her face soften, just slightly, was enough. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's living so well that those who wronged you can't understand how you're still smiling. From then on, I lived peacefully across the street, never interfering, never reminding them of what happened. But Linda did the reminding for me. Every time she saw me watering the plants, every time neighbors waved at me and not her, every time Michael came over with that calm smile. She had tried to erase me from her life. Instead, she found me rooted firmly in front of her, living proof that peace cannot be pushed away. And yet deep down, I didn't hate her. I didn't even dislike her anymore. I pitied her. Because no matter how big her house was or how carefully she decorated her world, she had no peace inside. And peace, once lost, is the hardest thing to buy back. That's when I understood something powerful. Revenge doesn't have to break someone. Sometimes it's just a mirror, held quietly, until they see themselves clearly. And that clarity can be far more painful than anger. It's strange how peace changes the air around you. Once I moved across the street, everything felt lighter. The sun seemed warmer, the mornings quieter, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up feeling like an unwanted guest in my own life. I spent my days in a simple rhythm: early tea, a walk down the street, tending to my small garden, and sometimes chatting with neighbors. There was no bitterness in me anymore. Just a quiet satisfaction that life had placed me exactly where I needed to be. But across the street, things weren't as peaceful. From my porch, I could see Michael's house. Not that I ever spied, I simply lived my life, and sometimes our paths crossed. Yet, even from a distance, I could sense the tension brewing inside that house. The laughter that used to spill out from their windows had faded. The blinds were often shut. Linda, who once greeted the world with confidence, now looked tired, restless. Michael, on the other hand, had started visiting me more often. He said it was just to check in, but I could tell he needed the quiet, the kind of quiet that heals a tired heart. One Saturday morning, he came over with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might like this, Dad," he said, handing me one. I smiled. "Thank you, son. Sit down." He sighed, settling into the chair beside me. "Linda and we've been arguing a lot lately. About small things, really. But it's like she's always tense." "People who hold on too tightly," I said gently, "often end up breaking what they're trying to protect." He nodded slowly. "She's been different ever since you moved out." I looked out across the street. Sometimes, when people get what they want, they realize it's not what they needed. He didn't reply, but I could tell my words sank in. Over the next few weeks, Michael started spending more time helping me with small things. Fixing the fence, mowing the lawn, sometimes just sitting in silence. He told me about his work, about how he felt increasingly disconnected at home. And I listened. That's all I did. I didn't give advice, didn't speak ill of Linda. I just listened. But the more he spoke, the more I could see that the very thing Linda had tried to push out, my calm presence, was what her home now lacked. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. There was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Linda stood there. She looked pale and uneasy, holding a casserole dish. "I made too much dinner," she said softly. "Thought you might like some." I could tell it wasn't about the food. It was about something she couldn't yet say. "Thank you," I said kindly, stepping aside. "Come in for a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded and walked in. She looked around the living room, taking in the warm glow of the lamp, the soft music playing in the background, the photographs of Margaret and me smiling from the mantelpiece. "It's cozy," she murmured. "It's home," I replied. "A little peace goes a long way." She sat down, still holding the casserole. After a long silence, she finally said, "David, I owe you an apology. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. When you lived with us, I felt like you were judging me. Like you didn't approve of how I ran the house. I wasn't judging, I said calmly. I was just there, quietly. Sometimes silence makes people uncomfortable. She smiled faintly. I think I see that now. Her voice trembled slightly as she added, I wanted control. Over everything. I thought if I could manage every detail, life would stay perfect. But it hasn't. And I don't even know why anymore. Control is an illusion, Linda, I said softly. Peace isn't about controlling what happens. It's about how you respond to it. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she nodded, slowly. You're right. That night when she left, she looked lighter, not happy but relieved. Like a burden had shifted just a little. The days that followed were different. Linda began waving from across the street when she saw me in the yard. Sometimes she'd bring over baked goods or ask for gardening tips. It was a small change, but an honest one. And Michael, he started smiling again. The kind of smile that comes from quiet understanding. He told me one day, Dad, I think Linda's been thinking a lot lately. She even suggested we have dinner with you sometime. I smiled. I'd like that. That dinner came a week later. It was simple, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and laughter that felt genuine. For the first time in a long time, the three of us sat together, not as opponents but as family. At one point, Linda raised her glass and said softly, to peace, and second chances. I met her eyes and nodded. To understanding. There was no need to mention the past. It was already behind us, not forgotten, but forgiven. As months passed, the relationship between us grew quietly respectful. Linda started volunteering at the same library where I worked. Sometimes we'd cross paths in the aisles, and she'd smile, a real smile this time. Michael and I began working on small carpentry projects together. It reminded me of his childhood, the days we'd build birdhouses in the garage, covered in sawdust but filled with laughter. And slowly, I realized something important. My revenge had turned into redemption. Not just for me, but for all of us. Because true revenge, the kind that heals, isn't about payback. It's about letting life show its balance. Linda had tried to push me away to make space for her version of peace. Instead, life showed her that peace can't be built on control, only on humility and understanding. And I found peace not by winning, but by walking away with grace. One afternoon, Linda stopped by while I was tending my roses. They're beautiful, she said quietly. Thank you, I replied. They just need patience and care. They don't bloom overnight. She nodded thoughtfully. Kind of like people, huh? I smiled. Exactly. We stood there for a moment, both looking at the roses swaying gently in the breeze. I'm glad you didn't leave town, she said finally. I think, maybe we needed you more than we knew. Her voice was soft, honest. And for the first time, I believed her. That night, as I sat by my window, I watched the lights in their house flicker gently. I saw Michael and Linda sitting together on their porch, laughing quietly. And I felt peace, not because I had won, but because I had let time and truth do the work that anger never could. Sometimes, I think back to that first painful moment, the day they told me to move out. It felt like the end of something. But now, I see it was just the beginning of understanding. Had I fought back, shouted, or tried to make them feel guilty, none of this peace would exist. Instead, I chose silence. And that silence taught louder lessons than words ever could. When I walk down the street now, people wave. The neighbors smile. I've become part of the community again, not as Michael's father, but simply as David. And Linda? She treats me like family. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. Sometimes, she even asks for advice. About life, marriage, patience. And every time, I smile and tell her the same thing. Kindness doesn't make you weak.
It makes you wise.
That's the quiet truth I've come to live by. Life will test your patience, your pride, your peace. But the moment you choose calm over chaos, that's when you truly win. It's been 3 years now since I moved across the street. 3 quiet, peaceful years. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sunset spill its colors over the neighborhood, and I think about how strange life can be. How what feels like the end of your story can actually be the start of a better chapter. When I first packed my bags and left Michael's house, I thought I was losing everything. My home, my place, my family. But life has a funny way of showing you that loss can be a lesson, not a punishment. I didn't lose a family.
I helped rebuild one.
There are moments now that make me smile in a quiet, thankful way. Linda walking across the street with a plate of freshly baked cookies. Michael helping me fix the porch swing, just like he did when he was a boy. The sound of their laughter drifting through the air at dinner time.
It's simple.
But simple things have a way of holding the most peace. Not long ago, Linda told me something that stayed with me. We were sitting together at the library, sorting through donated books. She said, "David, I used to think peace meant control, that if I kept everything perfect, no one could hurt me. But now I see, peace is letting go." I looked at her and said, "That's the hardest lesson life teaches us. The tighter we hold on, the more we lose. The moment we let go, we start to heal." She smiled softly and nodded. I could see the humility in her eyes, the same humility I once had to find within myself. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Revenge hadn't just changed her. It had changed me too. You see, I didn't buy that house to get back at anyone. Not really. I bought it to remind myself, and maybe them, that peace isn't given, it's created. That sometimes, the best response to cruelty isn't fury, but quiet strength. When someone wrongs you, they expect a reaction. They expect anger, shouting, maybe even revenge. But silence, that confuses them.
It unsettles them.
Because silence says, "You don't have the power to shake my peace." And when you hold your peace long enough, people start to see themselves more clearly. That's exactly what happened with Linda. She saw a man she had tried to erase, living calmly, kindly, across the street. She saw a life that didn't crumble without her approval. And that reflection forced her to face her own mistakes. That's not humiliation. That's realization. And realization is the most powerful kind of redemption. These days, I spend my mornings watering the garden. There's something healing about watching things grow, slowly, quietly, without demand. Sometimes Linda joins me. She kneels beside me, planting new flowers, asking about soil or sunlight, and I can't help but think how far we've all come. She doesn't try to control anymore.
She listens.
She laughs more easily now. There's gentleness in her voice that didn't exist before. And Michael, he's happier than I've ever seen him. He told me one day, "Dad, I think we all needed that break, that reset. You showed us what peace really looks like." I smiled and told him, "Peace isn't what you find, son. It's what you build." He nodded, like he finally understood. Sometimes when I sit alone at night, I think of Margaret, my late wife. I wonder what she'd say if she saw all this. She'd probably smile that knowing smile of hers and say, "See, David? You didn't have to shout to be heard."
And she'd be right.
Because in the end, peace spoke louder than anger ever could. A few weeks ago, Linda invited me over for Sunday dinner. The table was set beautifully, candles glowing softly. The same table where years ago she once told me I should move out. Now, she pulled out a chair for me herself. As we ate, she said, "You know, David, when I see you sitting there across the street, reading or tending the garden, it reminds me of what really matters. It reminds me that strength doesn't always need noise." I looked at her and said gently, "The quietest people often hold the loudest lessons."
She smiled.
You were right about that. We ate in peaceful silence after that, the kind of silence that feels warm, not heavy. When I walked back home that night, I stopped halfway across the street and looked at both houses. One represented the pain of the past. The other represented the peace I found after it. And in between, that quiet little street, stood the path of forgiveness. You know, people often think revenge is about making someone pay. But the older I get, the more I see it differently. Real revenge is about showing that their cruelty didn't destroy you. That you can walk away with grace, rebuild your peace, and let time do what anger never can. Because time has a way of returning everything to its rightful place. There was a day long ago when Linda tried to push me out of her world. Now, she brings me into it willingly. She asks for my thoughts, trusts my opinions, sometimes even calls just to talk. It's not because I forced her to respect me, it's because I showed her that respect starts with how you carry yourself when no one is watching. I never needed revenge in the traditional sense. All I needed was to keep living with quiet dignity, and let life take care of the rest. Looking back, I see now that everything happened exactly as it should. The pain, the humiliation, the loneliness, all of it shaped the peace I have today. If I had stayed in their house, I might have spent the rest of my days as a silent burden. But being pushed out forced me to stand up, to start again, to show what strength truly looks like. And maybe that's what life is always trying to teach us, that the storms meant to break us often end up washing us clean. Now, every evening, when the sky turns golden and the wind carries the scent of roses, I whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude.
Not for revenge. Not for victory. But for peace.
For the chance to live my final years surrounded by calm hearts and healed relationships. And for the lesson that took me a lifetime to learn. Sometimes silence is the best revenge. Not because it hurts others, but because it saves you. It protects your dignity, your heart, your sanity. It reminds the world that you can't be destroyed by what you've already forgiven. So whenever someone wrongs you, don't rush to prove them wrong. Don't fight to make them see your worth.
Just step back.
Live well. Let life show the truth on its own. Because one day when they look across the street, they'll see you smiling at peace, untouched by their cruelty. And in that quiet moment, they'll realize what they lost.
Not a victim, but a teacher.